Um, Hello, everyone. I am Irvin Zabaleta Jimenez. I use he, him, él pronouns. And on behalf of North Carolina Campus Compact, it is my pleasure to welcome you to session 5 of SEAC 2020. Yes, we did it. So happy that you guys, you all have been working with us as we pivot this virtual conference. It's, while we are sad that we cannot see you in person and give you a warm hug. We have been really happy to see you and how we've been interacting with one another. Welcome. You are UNC Charlotte's Bonner Leaders, a partnership to combat gentrification within Charlotte's historic Optimistic Park neighborhood. This presentation is brought to you by Dr. Tamara Johnson. She is the Director of Engaged Scholarship at UNC Charlotte. Boris Henderson, the Chief Strategy Officer, and Udemadu. She is a Bonner Leader within UNC Charlotte. We just said earlier that I was a Bonner Scholar myself, so Bonner alumni, Bonner, hashtag Bonner Love. So very, very excited about this presentation. Just a quick logistics information. We welcome your questions. So please use the Q&A function of the Zoom platform to send us your question. At the end of the presentation, I'll be asking the presenters your questions. So please, please, please use the Q&A part of the question. So ask your questions, and then at the end of the session, we're gonna end a few minutes early so that you can transition to the closing. It's just gonna be quick, straight to the point closing with Leslie Garvin, our Executive Director of North Carolina Campus Compact. You don't want to miss it. Also, our social media handles are NC Campus Compact, at NC Campus Compact on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Be sure that you are tagging us and using the network's official hashtag, which is NC Engage Campus. Again, be sure you tweet hashtag NC Engage Campus and you tag us on our handles. Without further ado, I'm gonna let Tamara and Uju take it on. Welcome.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. We are happy to talk to you a little bit about our Bonner Leaders Optimist Park project in a neighborhood in Charlotte. I will let my colleagues introduce themselves, although we are waiting for Boris Henderson to join us. He is the Chief Strategy Officer at Aldersgate, and we'll be talking a bit about his role in the project. And then Uju, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for the introduction as well. My name is Uju Udemadu. I'm a third-year psychology student and I'm a part of the 2018 cohort for Bonner Leaders. So I'm very excited to be a part of this. Thank you.
And my name is Tamara Johnson. I'm the Director of Engaged Scholarship in UNC Charlotte's newly reorganized Urban Research and Community Engagement Unit on our campus. We wanted to start by recognizing the current social, political, and economic and environmental context in which we are situated. Of course, it's a global context, and there are very specific movements happening across the country and in Charlotte itself. And so the students in our program drafted this statement of support for racial equity and justice. And so I thought it was just really important for you to see their words and the ways in which they feel connected to the work that's happening in the Charlotte area at the moment, as well as to movements nationally and globally. So we'll start by talking a little bit about the Bonner Leaders program and how that is situated in UNC Charlotte's interest in really sort of pushing the boundaries of urban research and community engagement and enhancing that and broadening that. We'll talk a little bit about why Optimist Park as part of this project, And then again, the approaches that we've taken with the residents of Optimist Park, with the Bonner leaders, and with other city, county, and non-governmental agencies, and how are we measuring success in the project. So that's a little bit about what we'll be talking about, but again, if you have questions along the way, if something is not clear, feel free. And Irving, I think you can let us know when there are questions, right? That's the case. So yes, please feel free to stop us at any time, and of course we'll leave time at the end for questions. So we wanted to start with talking a little bit about the Bonner Leaders Program. As Irving mentioned, Bonner is a national foundation. There are Bonner programs at many institutions across the country, nationally. And UNC Charlotte, our program is relatively new. So this is our 4th full year, although one might argue that this year counts as the full 4, but this is our 4th year of the program, and it's the first year that we've implemented this Optimist Park piece of the project. And so you can see our mission statement there on the side. Again, we bring students in, we fund the work that students do in community through federal work study. So all of our students are eligible for that and do receive federal work study stipends and funding for their community engagement piece. We emphasize leadership, community engagement, and academic success. And again, there's curriculum, there's a coursework associated with the program. Students are placed in community partners for their full 4 years of the program. We place them in the first year, and then they get to choose, and they sort of pitch to us after a long conversation with the community partner. They suggest a partner that they would like to be placed with in subsequent years. The idea, again, is to really, and I'll talk a little bit about the development model, but to increase access to community engagement opportunities for students, and to really connect students to those opportunities, not only in the city, but then also on campus. And so I'll explain a little bit about our on-campus partnerships to increase those, the depth and breadth of engagement that our students have. And I see that Boris has joined us now. So welcome. We'll have you'll introduce yourself in a bit. And again, the program, young as it is really situated in Charlotte, in the greater Charlotte area as an urban context. UNC Charlotte is North Carolina's urban research institution. We see ourselves that way, and the institution has taken steps in recent years to really, I don't want to say live up to that mission, but to really own that urban context in some ways. And what does that mean exactly? So again, in 2011, our Center City building was established in the heart of Center City, Charlotte. Our campus is not in the heart of Center City, Charlotte. Arguably, we're about 15, depending on how you go, 15, 20 minutes away driving from that. But we do have now light rail connection that will connect our main campus, where most of our students do take their classes, to the heart of Charlotte, as uptown Charlotte, through the neighborhoods and business centers in between, and then down to the southern part of the county. So we're connected by light rail from our campus. And that has really expanded for us, at least for the Bonner program, the ways in which we can have students engage with the city. And what does that mean? And so I know that Heather Smith was a part of the previous session, and she literally wrote the book on Charlotte as a globalizing city. And so we are looking, again, at having students investigate what that means. And part of that, of course, we do face challenges with social polarization and economic polarization in our city. So while we are globalizing, in this day is an exact conversation, right, that we have about the fact that we still are a city that has broad disparity economically. And so what you see, the image on the far left, is what we tend to refer to as the crescent and the wedge in Charlotte. We tend to have an affluent wedge in the southern part of the city, in the county, surrounded by a crescent. And again, a lot of the indicators of economic mobility, education, health, home ownership, access to opportunities tend to follow that sort of crescent wedge pattern. And so what does that mean, and how do students really engage with that? What does that mean systemically, and what are some of the solutions to that kind of urban challenge? And so again, I think UNC Charlotte in recent years has really shifted its identity from, really kind of embracing a 49er, UNC Charlotte 49er identity with the branding and the green and the sports. And I think that the institution has really made it very clear what it means to be a UNC Charlotte 49er for incoming students. And that's everything from our new day of convocation for students to really bring them into that vision and that narrative. And I think what the work that we are trying to do is to really have part of what it means to be a Charlotte 49er is also answering the question, what does it mean to be a Charlotte resident while you are on campus, a resident even of the greater Charlotte region, right? So that's the kind of work that we're hoping to embed our students in as we move forward. And again, the Bonner program is a 4-year program. We bring students in as incoming first-year students. We tend to place them in that first year either in a health concentration or an education concentration. That will shift a little bit in coming years. And then, as I mentioned, they choose their partnerships in their subsequent years. That first year, they also take a freshman seminar course with us that talks about developing what it means to develop a civic identity. Who are you as a leader? What does what strengths do you have in these types of things? And then in the second semester course, the spring semester course is, they receive course credit, and I'll talk a little bit about that course, but it's designed to really introduce them to Charlotte. And then the Optimist Park project falls in their second and third year. And again, we are in the first year of this project. And it's really designed to have students have a hands-on experience in developing some of those skills that we think are important for this kind of work, community engagement work. Everything from marketing and communication to fundraising to, of course, asset-based community development that we'll talk about, and program development. So kind of working on building those skills with students. And then by their fourth year, they would have engaged in a capstone project that so far has looked like undergraduate research. And again, that's a partnership that we're developing with our Office of Undergraduate Research on campus, but to get students to understand what community-based research is and could be, what does data collection look like, what are some of the methodologies associated with that, and then they present either in the summertime at our summer research symposium or at, in the spring semester at our urban research conference on campus, undergraduate research conference, excuse me. So that's really what our 4-year model looks like. And I want to talk a little bit again about the spring course because it builds on some of the assignment that they had in the fall to do like an introduction to asset-based mapping to understand what that is, and really delves into what does civic responsibility mean, and what does that mean for you in Charlotte, right? What are some of the challenges the city faces? What are some of the opportunities presented in a city like Charlotte, and Charlotte in particular, and what is the history and the background? We use a racial equity lens. And so looking at Charlotte's history, visiting the Levine Museum of the New South, and being really introduced to local knowledge around that. So again, sometimes we've talked to members of the Levine Museum, sometimes we've talked to city planners about not only the past, but then how do they see the city, and what are the ways in which they engage the community to understand a future for the city. And then it's topical. And so students are introduced to local experts and community leaders working in areas like public education, affordable housing, the digital divide, immigration, topics that are really resonating with Charlotte residents, so that they understand not only the overarching topic, but then also the people doing the work and those agencies doing the work in the city. So that's how the spring course is designed. And I say that to say because that's kind of how Boris was brought into the project, right? Oftentimes, while we have these topics that students discuss week after week, there tends to be like an underlying thread that runs through them. And one year, for example, almost every person, whether they were talking about immigration or education or housing, talked about voter engagement, right? So that's what almost every guest speaker said, unprompted. And in this year, this would have been Uju's first year at UNC Charlotte and with the program, the underlying thread that came up over and over and over again was gentrification. And we try to present sort of a nuanced understanding of topics. And so I asked Boris, and he'll talk about his role in this and why I asked him, but I think he has a really interesting perspective and experience. And he then kind of designed his talk about gentrification, and he can talk to you a little bit about why and how, and then how the project sort of built out of that initial invitation.
Great, thank you, Tamara. Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah.
So apologize for coming on a few minutes late. My name is Boris Henderson, and I'll take just a few minutes to give you a little bit about my background and my ties to the project. I was born and raised in Charlotte, and the interesting thing is, as we talk about and think about the Chetty study and the vast disparities in Charlotte, years ago, I was given a talk or speech at a Habitat Charlotte event. And during that speech, I talked about the fact that I should not have made it out of the situation I made it out of. So when Tamara and our paths crossed in LDI, which is Leadership Development Initiative, and the whole course was focused on diversity, inclusion, and equity. And you know, I shared my story and the work I was doing in the community, and I agreed to give a talk to the Bonner Leader students, which was a treat for me because I was a Bonner student at Davidson College and have always been involved in community service and civic type work. But what I realized when I was very enthusiastically preparing to do the gentrification walk in Optimist Park, you know, that small voice deep down inside, if you're serious about the work and have been moved and impacted by the communities and people who allow you to overcome certain odds, that voice deep down inside says, so what are we going to do about it? So we spent an afternoon in Optimist Park, and at the end of that talk, I said, hey, so what are we going to do about it? We see what's going on in Optimist Park. We see the people who are being impacted. So I posed a question to the students, and that was really the genesis of structuring the action plan and what we've done about it that we'll get to in the presentation. As mentioned, I was a Bonner Scholar at Davidson College, and professionally, I spent my early career in banking, and one of my jobs in banking was in community development finance, so using tax credits to impact underserved communities and on the commercial real estate side and on the residential side. But eventually, I realized that if I was serious about work within the community, I had to figure out a way to make my day job my passion. And so I joined the Housing Partnership, I guess over 2 years ago, which is a local nonprofit that focuses on economic development. So many of the issues that we we'll wrestle with throughout this course. And after a while, I was recruited away to another nonprofit, which is Aldersgate. So currently I serve as the Chief Strategy Officer at Aldersgate, which is a life plan community. And you might say, well, what does that have to do with what you're doing now? But we have an amazing opportunity here on our campus because we're land rich. We're on 231 acres to do we have a very unique opportunity to impact Charlotte's need for more housing that's affordable. And so that's really a big part of my job, my day job. And let me circle back around to say, after our walk and we posed the question of, so what are we going to do about it? The next question is, so how do you execute a plan? And so what I realized was I had to go back to Optimist Park. And many of the residents who've been in Optimist Park for 30 plus years remember me as a kid. Remember the day I went off to college, Davidson College, which made a lot of people in the community proud. I had to go back and lay the groundwork in a sense. I had to touch base with some of the community leaders. I had to reach out to the Optimist Park Neighborhood Association president and remind them of the connection, the previous connection to UNC Charlotte, and to really say, hey, we want to come in and do great work for the long term. And so that was the groundwork which allowed us to go in and do what I think is amazing work that we've already done and will certainly continue. So I guess the question is, so why Optimist Park? And where is Optimist Park? Tamara, do you want me to take this or?
Sure, I can talk a little bit about it. So I think one of the connections for the university, of course, is that Optimist Park is on the light rail line. It's the stop right before our Center City building. So it is connected to the campus. The light rail, of course, has, was really talked about as an opportunity for students and for faculty to get into Charlotte, as well as to bring Charlotte into our campus. But I think part of the conversation was, and Boris, you had been in communication with some residents of Optimist Park before this walk. But the conversation was that not everybody sees the light rail, of course, as bringing opportunity, right? So sometimes it brings other things. And so that was the conversation that residents had and about some of their concerns. I will point out that, again, as you see on the map here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this is I'll share some data very briefly from some sources, but I wanted to point out that the project is taking place sort of in this section, while the NPA and the census tract is actually much broader. So if you're familiar with Charlotte, Amelie's is here, which is our kind of the marker in many ways before the Arts District starts, the North Davidson Arts District. And then, of course, our Center City building is down on this side of campus. And so that's sort of where the neighborhood is and where it's located. You'll also see Google points out the breweries on this map as well. And so just very briefly, and of course, my head is right in front of all of these figures. So let me move myself around. You kind of see, again, there's the Optimist Park situated in the county, and we use Mecklenburg County quality of life data sets quite a bit to understand neighborhoods, and we encourage our students to use that as a resource. Our Urban Institute that's been involved in establishing that wealth of information for the county. And so just to kind of give you a sense of the area that we're talking about. And again, this is measuring the tract, although the area that we're looking at within that NPA is actually a bit smaller. And so you can kind of see some of the demographic data for the area in blue. The green column is Mecklenburg County broadly. So that will measure Optimist Park as a neighborhood against the county. Again, it's not that I want you to absorb all of this, the detail of this information, but looking at sort of general patterns. And again, with data as recent as 2018, but we know a lot of change has happened since our most recent data set. So again, looking at home ownership and the price of housing in that area, at 2015, I'm sure Boris can tell you that is probably that $180,000 figure is very different now than it was even 5 years ago. But again, kind of older homes, the rental costs are on par and slightly higher than the rest of the county. And again, it's a product in many ways of its situation, not only on the light rail line, but its proximity to uptown. But you'll see, again, a lot of new construction compared to the county numbers and a lot of demolition compared to county numbers as well. And then here's some health data just to kind of give you a sense of, again, it's measuring the whole tract, and our specific neighborhood in that tract might be a bit different, but again, kind of compared to the county, proximity to grocery stores, proximity to low-cost healthcare, birth weights and things like that. So you can kind of see the ways in which the neighborhood matches up with county information. Again, access to or household income as compared to the county is much lower. Although also so is the percentage of the population who receive food nutrition services. Likewise, again, sort of looking at crime and safety data for the area, and the amount of property crime and violent crime is higher as recorded than the rest of the county. And voter participation is lower, slightly lower. So those are the kinds of, we encourage our students to get a sense of the numbers, right? But then also, as Uju will talk about, the relationship building aspects of the project as well. And I'll hand it back to Boris to talk specifically about gentrification in that area.
Great, thank you. You know, I think this is a good visual representation of, you know, number one, it identifies the fact that Optimist Park is in an area that is undergoing gentrification. But the two pictures on this slide, you know, if you think, well, as I think back to my childhood in Optimist Park, these are, I would have never imagined that an old mill would become a retail and restaurant destination in walking distance to the house I grew up in, and then of course the light rail, which is spurred development up and down the rail line. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I think it's important to get a bird's eye view of the history of Optimist Park to really appreciate the experience and impact that our students are having within the community. You know, years ago, there were mills within Optimist Park in the North Davidson area, which is effectively in walking distance. So a lot of the families who lived in the area were employed by the mills. And then during the 1960s, like in many places across the country, there was white flight out of urban areas as the civil rights movement and other social issues impacted the inner cities. So in 1987, we moved in. I guess I mentioned earlier, I grew up in a Habitat house in Optimist Park. So In 1987, I remember the Jimmy Carter build in Charlotte. We had not moved into our Habitat home, but we were putting in what we call sweat equity. And so I was actually doing volunteer work as a kid in Optimist Park during the Jimmy Carter build. So Optimist Park is not only a historic neighborhood based on the mill villages, but the fact that a U.S. president built or helped build over 14 houses in Optimist Park. I think that project raised over $1.5 million. And it was really the beginnings of new investment and surrounding the Optimist Park with resources such as the churches and other organizations. Then fast forward in 2005, as I think more Americans wanted to return to the cities, and we're seeing the full measure of it now as the millennials and other Americans want to be in very walkable areas that are close to mass transit and downtown areas. So Optimist Park, as shown on one of the other maps, is very close to downtown. I remember as a kid being able to see the fireworks, the 4th of July fireworks from our front yard, and they were occurring downtown. But in the early 2000s, as and looking back, was the subprime crisis swept the nation. You had early younger professionals moving into areas close to downtown, and Optimist Park was one of those areas that they moved into because of, number one, the housing stock. Houses in '05 in Optimist Park were probably selling for $50,000 to $70,000. So it was a great investment for those who saw the longer term potential of Optimist Park. But of course, those who had been in the neighborhood for 30 plus years were going to be negatively impacted. And then in 2016, the Blue Line extension north was completed. And if you know anything about Charlotte, the light rail was initially completed south. And I remember reading an article as it was being completed, and the citizens of Charlotte were concerned about the cost to build that light rail. And I think one thing we learned is that the investments as a result of the light rail extension south far exceeded the cost in terms of tax base, in terms of restaurants and other amenities building up around the light rail line. So when the light rail was completed north, we knew those neighborhoods and businesses along the path of the light rail would be impacted in a very similar way. And so Optimist Park is right outside of a light rail station. It's close to downtown. And so we knew by the laws of nature or economics that gentrification, which had already started in 2005, would accelerate as a result of the investments. As we mentioned earlier, Charlotte, the Chetty study, were ranked last in terms of upward mobility. And part of that is, as Tamara alluded to earlier, Charlotte has become more of an international city as the banks and the healthcare system has diversified. And that, really contributed to some of the inequalities that we're seeing in the numbers. In other words, where you live has a strong determinant of opportunity. The crescent and wedge was referenced earlier. But the very underlying issue is the cost of housing has skyrocketed since coming out of the subprime crisis, and one of the reasons is there was an explosive growth in terms of population. The millennials, that population is larger than the baby boomers. So there's a tremendous pressure on housing stock, which resulted in the cost of housing going up. So Optimist Park, it was in the perfect storm of being in a location where that was highly sought after. There was a neighborhood where people who, and a lot of them were habitat homeowners, that lived in the neighborhood for 20 to 30 years. Their income levels had not increased because, again, they fell in the bucket of those who were not moving up the economic ladder as we would expect as the city grew and thrived. And so quite naturally, we knew people in Optimist Park would be pushed out and at a very severe rate. So one of the things and let me back up and say, part of the groundwork I did this summer before we brought the students and came up with a plan in Optimist Park, I was almost weekly getting phone calls from people in Optimist Park who knew me as a kid and who knew I was in real estate, both on the single family and the commercial side. They were calling me and begging me for help to say, hey, they're trying to push us out. Taxes are going up. People are knocking on my door to ask me to sell my house. Can you help me? So the timing was perfect to come back in with our Bonner leaders to try to do something about the problem. But one great thing about Optimist Park had an existing neighborhood association and one that had previously had interactions with city council. One of the individuals who spoke at our listening circle was my best friend mom, and she ran for city council years ago. And she also was deeply involved in the neighborhood association. So the neighborhood association had a strong history, but it had kind of fallen in disrepair due to the lack of really leadership and resources and capacity building. This is Mr. James Atkinson, who is the current neighborhood association president. He's just thrilled that our Bonner leaders are in the neighborhood and helping with change. So as I mentioned, the neighborhood has a pretty strong history of activism and engage in the political process. And so at the end of the day, we felt like the people of Optimist Park spoke through a cry for help. These two pictures really demonstrate, will illustrate exactly what's happening in Optimist Park. The picture on your right is a 3-story structure that's built next to a Habitat house. And I know that Habitat homeowner, they've been there for 35 years. They paid $30,000 for their house, which was built right after the Carter bill. The new condo structure is selling for north of $400,000. So the tax base within Optimist Park has gone up significantly. The picture on your left is actually 2 Habitat houses that were built during the Carter build in around 1987. In the background, you see looming our new apartments where a 1-bedroom probably rents for about $1,500. And so these are the images and families that our students met with to get a really good sense of what gentrification is and how our families that are being displaced are impacted. So as we thought through, okay, we see what's going on in Optimist Park. We've met families with stories of, hey, we want to stay, but we need help. So what we realized is that we needed to quickly understand what assets exist in the community. And one of the, and I'll give you one example of how we were able to do this and leverage that. So the Chapel of Christ the King Center, which we'll talk about later, was a pillar in the community when I was a kid. It ran an after-school program that, you know, I certainly benefited from, and many of my friends benefited from. When I often speak to people about defying odds, we had at least 3 or 4 Chapel Hill graduates who were impacted by the Chapel of Christ the King Center. I went to Davidson, and we had somebody who gone to Duke. These are first generation kids who graduated from high school, and certainly they're first in their families to go to college. So we knew which assets existed in the community: the church, the neighborhood association, and we also knew we had to quickly develop a strong connection to Mr. James Atkinson, who was the neighborhood association leader. Linda Williams, who I mentioned earlier, was a resident in Optimist Park who ran for city council, and other folks who had been very involved in the neighborhood. We quickly connected to them because when I knocked on the door, they remembered me as a kid, and they had followed me after I'd gone to Davidson and done other work in the community. And then we had you know, through LDI, you know, Tamara has great relationships with folks at the city and county, and I have relationships with the individuals at the city and county and other nonprofits in Charlotte, in the surrounding areas that could be resources and quote assets to bring into Optimist Park. Again, I tend to think in terms of models and strategies, partly because I went to business school, but we looked at what models or tools we could use to effectively execute what we wanted to do within Optimist Park. Optimist Park spoke. We know gentrification is occurring, but how do we make change effectively? So the asset-based community development model is one that the students are very familiar with, and one that I certainly believe in. And so we use that conceptually as a way to develop our plan and strategy. If you go to the next slide, please.
Yeah, and Uja will walk us through the model.
Okay. All right, Uja.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Tamara and Boris, for the information that you applied up until this point. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the work we did within Optimist Park and how we went about that, basically using all the information Tamara and Boris just provided us with. And so essentially, when we first discussed how we should approach the issue of gentrification within the area of Optimist Park, just as Boris had stated, we wanted to go about in a manner that was efficient as possible. So we said we were going to use the asset-based community development model to approach this issue of gentrification within the area. So the asset-based community development model focuses more on using the assets that the community has rather than concentrating on their needs. So this was to, we wanted to utilize this to assist the community with driving an initiative to combat the negative impact of gentrification. So that would focus on what lies in the community, mobilizing individuals, associations, as the Optimist Park Neighborhood Association and other institutions to help them mobilize and initiate a change that would be basically community driven. you don't mind. Go to the next one. All right, so I'm just going to be going a little bit into this graph that basically helps you envision what an asset-based community development model focuses on. So one step or one aspect of the asset-based community development model is focusing on discovering strengths. So when looking into Optimist Park, we want to figure out, okay, what is there? How would this be useful with driving the initiative, and how can we basically utilize this long term? Then we go into organizing and mapping, and linking and mobilizing, and also then therefore having a community-driven initiative. So we basically want to repeat this process until we're taking a step closer to accomplishing the ultimate goal and long-term sustainability eventually of hopefully driving that community-led initiative towards gentrification. So within the case of Optimist Park, we want to figure out what is available. We want to figure out how do we distribute these information and tools, how do we make them more keenly aware of how they're able to utilize what is available. That would be through organizing and mapping. Then we want to be able to link them to these resources and help them mobilize so they are able to drive this initiative. All right, so with that being said, I'm just going to talk a little bit about our methodology. So with utilizing this asset-based mapping community-driven initiative, we wanted to, when we were focusing on how we would basically assist Optimist Park in the most efficient way possible, we wanted to create sort of a plan that was multi-layered and basically targeted different areas of concerns when it came to the issues that were affecting Optimist Park residents. So one of our goals were to leverage and build upon the institution's community engagement strategies, and also invest within the area of Charlotte, the greater city of Charlotte, and to build upon the previous work that was done within Optimist Park. We wanted to establish a strong tie in the communities through relationships and trust building. So just as Boris was stating, a lot of the residents came to him because they were aware and they were familiar with him and his family. So there was a lot of history within that, and a lot of trust within that. All right. We utilize listening circles as an imperative tool to basically develop and execute activities within our thought out action plan. So we wanted to use key community members to help us drive this process, and basically with having people that they know, with having people within these positions that they know, it assisted more further with the level, with being personable, and also having that sense of trust, which is very imperative when you're a new individual to the community and you're coming in, you're saying, hey, we're going to help you with this. You want to establish that level of trust and able to help efficiently. So we also thought about building bridges. We also sought out to build bridges to local government and other organizations that would provide critical resources. This goes back into the idea of assets, figuring out what is available, figure out what tools do they need, and figuring out what resources can be distributed to help drive this community initiative. So a few of those, I'm going to name them for you, is the access to the city of Charlotte, to assist with access to the city of Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and other government entities. This is to assist the residents, essentially because within the listening circles, a lot of them have voiced the concern that they felt like all these changes were occurring, but they were unable to have a voice as to what was going on. So assisting them with the resources by connecting them with those in the greater city of Charlotte and Mecklenburg and other government entities, we want to basically champion their voices by connecting them with these individuals. Then we have the Habitat for Humanity of Charlotte reengaged, and that was also provided during the community activities that I'm going to talk about in the coming slides that occurred during the meet and greet. We will also want to build bridges with the Charlotte Legal Advocacy Group, and that was for tax relief. So basically with gentrification, as we're all aware, one of the greatest negative impacts that it places is it raises the property taxes of pre-existing homeowners. So they're basically pressured to sell their homes. So with a tax relief fund, we'd basically administer and assist with connecting them with the resources that would allow for them, if they are experiencing these issues, to have that basically that leg room and that extra fund to assist them with paying these property taxes. Then we have the Equitable Communities of Charlotte and the Johnston Line community. You don't want to go to the next slide? All right. So just as we were saying, as I stated previously in the last slide, we wanted to target important organizations to strengthen and build the capacity. So with community-driven initiatives, community-driven initiatives are very powerful and very effective when the residents are able to continue the work and sustain the work long-term. So just as Boris has stated previously, the Christ the King Center was a very strong pillar within Optimist Park. There's much history rooted within the church. There's, just as he stated, there were after-school activities. There were so many community events that allowed the residents to say, like, wow, when they look back, this church was, it had this part of my life. Like, there was a strong sense of emotion when the residents talked about the role that the Christ the King Center had in their lives. And also we wanted to assist the Optimist Park Neighborhood Association because just as we were saying previously, they're very effective in their previous manners, but they needed more resources to help further drive this initiative and outside help. All right, next slide, please. All right, so going into this, we wanted to be as effective as possible, as we were previously stating. And one way to be effective in any setting, regardless of if it's an initiative such as this or another social type of driven initiative, one way is to be as personal as possible, because with understanding the situation from the lens of those experiencing it, you are then better equipped with a perspective to go in and find the resources to connect and to build bridges where bridges need to be built. So we had community engagement activities and events that would allow for the residents to come in, communicate, hey, this is going on, or to connect them with individuals that they could talk to, or to be better equipped with the knowledge that they needed to go and then apply that to assist with the impacts of gentrification. So just as was stated before, this the issue of gentrification is one that needs to be addressed in multiple areas. So we wanted to think of a very specific and thorough action plan to not only just assist one aspect such as tax relief. We wanted to look at the picture long term. We wanted to look at all the things that the residents were speaking about, and we wanted to basically apply that to an action plan so we could assist in the most sufficient and efficient way possible. So with those listening circles, we had the opportunity to hear a lot of the things that the residents were saying, a lot of the concerns that they had over the years, and it was we basically worked with them to create this action plan. Just as we stated previously, this is not, this was a project that we sought out to have the community lead. So this action plan was built with the community based off of things we're saying, and we edited it. There was several processes we went through to reach it as it is now. So one of the things that they stated, as I mentioned previously, is that they felt as if they had no voice. So we wanted to make sure that they had a voice. We wanted to make sure that they were able to speak to other officials within the greater city of Charlotte and government representatives, so that they could have the resources they need, that they could have the help that they need when it came to voicing their opinions on the things, voicing their concerns on the things that were changing within their community, and that they will be equipped with the tools and the strategies to talk to these elected officials and to challenge the detrimental changes that were occurring within the neighborhood. So we also wanted to strengthen the ties with Habitat Charlotte. Just as it was stated before, a lot of the Optimist Park residents were Habitat for Humanity homeowners. So we wanted to strengthen the ties. We wanted to basically assist with distributing more information with regards to the home. And we wanted the residents to basically know that these resources were out there in case that they were experiencing different things. Like, for example, for Habitat for Humanity, we were able to distribute information regarding critical home repair, because a lot of the homeowners needed care within their homes for different issues, and some of them weren't aware of the critical home repair, so we were able to help them connect them to that resource. So another issue that we wanted to seek out, of course, is the issue of the negative impact of higher property taxes. So just as I stated before, we wanted to create a fund that would basically be administered by the Optimist Park Association, where residents can basically go, if they were experiencing these higher property taxes, and to have that room, to have that further assistance so that they would be able to combat that issue. So we were thinking, how would we be able to do this effectively? And we thought of the emergency tax relief fund. So if residents were experiencing the issue down the road and they needed a couple of extra funds to help them in that year, they would be able to get that. So we coined it as an emergency relief fund. And we also wanted to do a service project with this fund. The goal was to have it as a service project to raise awareness to the community's issues. So as we researched and as we figured out what the community's assets were and what information that would be beneficial to the residents to help them drive this initiative to combat gentrification, we figured out that we needed to distribute information to the residents in a manner that would be accessible, a manner that would be efficient. So we wanted all the Optimist Park residents to have this information, to have the plan that we had. And so we figured out, well, we could do flyers, we could do Facebook and social media for the younger generation, and we could have central and consistent meeting places. So we figured out, we basically utilized the flyers method more, just because we figured out that having that, personal conversation, like, oh, we're having this at this time, or if they have any questions, it was just a little bit more easier to distribute flyers, especially at the Chapel of Christ the King Church, because a lot of residents tend to come in and out. So we basically distributed flyers. We also wanted to have an Optimist Park history project with Braxton Winston, and this was to preserve that history, the rich history of Optimist Park. A lot of the residents talked about the impact and the influence that the church, that the people had on their lives. So we really wanted to preserve that because of the level of significance that it had, not only their family, but future generations. And we also talked about completing a financial literacy and educational workshop for the residents. All right, just as we were talking before, we want to assist the Optimist Park residents with equipping them with the knowledge that pre-existing assets, or just basically helping with researching information that would be able to equip them with the tools they need to address the specific areas of concern with regards to the negative impact of gentrification. So one of the events that we were able to organize was the Your Home, Your Legacy Optimist Park Forum. And so this constituted of community organizations and real estate professionals that were basically able to inform and basically distribute resources that discussed how, if you're experiencing this issue of being pressured to sell your home, what resources are there available so that you don't necessarily have to leave, that you could stay. And also it talked a little bit more about zoning changes and, provided a little bit of statistics regarding, gentrification and its relation to the home's value. Okay. All right, we also, with regards to our tax relief fund, we also partnered with the Charlotte Legal Advocacy Center to distribute information regarding the property tax relief resources. So one of our main methods of distribution was flyers. We posted the flyers of the tax relief fund on near the Chapel of Christ the King Center. And due to the current circumstance, we had to modify the completion for this process differently, so it was done remotely. And so we saw that with all the events and activities that were and all the events and activities that were organized before, we realized that this had a significantly higher response rate than the previous efforts. All right, and so we also want to strengthen those existing assets that were, and also build bridges within the neighborhood, the Optimist Park neighborhood. So just as we stated before, the Optimist Park neighborhood was a very pivotal asset for the community, but it lacked resources. So one of the things we wanted to do was to assist and provide technical support for the Optimist Park Association. And also, we have noticed that with the introduction and with the community-led initiatives and activities, community engagement activities that we have had, that the church and its resources have begun attracting resources and more assistance. And we also noted that the 15th Street, the Church of God, is now, it's more strongly and better connected with the chapel and also the Optimist Park Neighborhood Association, as well as more imperative areas of influence. All right, so I just want to give a little bit of, sorry, I know we're running short of time. So what this project has done, I just want to talk about it from my perspective. Coming into this, I've already had a sense of what gentrification was. As I said before, for those of you who joined a little bit late, I'm from Durham. So Durham has had its own history of gentrification. If anybody's familiar with the Hayti community, I've read about it. So coming into this project, I was very open-minded in a sense of I understood that this was a very strong community in sense of culture, in sense of some of the stuff that they were accomplishing, and certain things took place like urban renewal that basically pressured a lot of people within that community to sell their homes, to move. Some of them were forced out abruptly. So it really challenged me to understand that gentrification is something that's occurring everywhere. Essentially, it's occurring in many states across the U.S. So it really put things into perspective for me. But it also encouraged me to think critically. And I say that because gentrification is a very multi-layered issue. It affects not only financial areas, but also social areas. It also affects, there could be some conversation of intersectionality with regards to health and other areas. So it really opened up my eyes and equipped me with a lens for the wider society.
And well, I know we are short on time, and so we can talk a little bit about how we measure success quickly. And I don't know if there are any questions up until now that we should answer, or if we could wrap this piece up in a couple of minutes, and then
we have 2 minutes left. So
okay.
We haven't had any questions in the Q&A section. If you all want to use the chat box or the Q&A functions, please do so. We probably have time for one question, and then if you just want to wrap up like the part of assessment, we do have to go ahead and move to the closing. So yeah.
Okay. Well, and we can kind of talk a little bit. What if we, if anybody has a question, we can put it in the chat. Otherwise, we'll wrap up pretty quickly. Boris, is there anything that you want to say about this model in particular?
Yes, we talked about the importance of the asset-based community development model to gain community buy-in, to come up with a plan. But one of the things we really wanted to focus on was making a true impact, and how do you measure that? So the theory of change is a framework we use to measure impact against goals that were set by the community, by the students and others. So just to mention that's a framework we've used to make sure we're advancing towards our long-term goal. If you could go to the next slide, and this is a visual representation of, okay, here are some of our key long-term goals, which the action plan that Uju spoke about is woven into the fabric of the long-term goals. And here are the activities that we're engaging in to meet those long-term goals and deliverables. One recent really big win for Optimist Park, which directly ties to the work that the Bonner leaders have done in the community, is we received a $15,000 grant from the city of Charlotte to do a community garden. We talked about the importance of building bridges. That garden will be a space where the old residents of Optimist Park who are feeling the pressure to move out will be able to interact post-COVID with the newer residents who positively identify with community garden. So this is something that the community, the Chapel Christ King Center, is very excited about. But that ties, this is a representation of just how those tie back to our long-term goals, which is in the framework of the theory of change.
And then just very quickly, we'll say that for the Bonner program, as well as for some new programming coming online for my unit or my Office of Engaged Scholarship, we're using the IUPUI Civic Mindedness Graduate Rubric. Our assessment was a bit disrupted this year, so that's the model that we will be moving toward in the future. And then the only other thing that we were going to talk about, of course, is just the importance of this work in this particular moment for Charlotte. Again, with really sort of laying bare those inequities, economic and health disparities, and relationships with public safety. So we do feel like this moment in our city is an important one. And so with that, again, Irving, you can let me know how we did on the time, but if there are any quick questions we can answer before moving on.
Thank you so much, Tamara and Uju and Boris, for this wonderful presentation. I myself wrote a lot of notes from your presentation. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your effort into this project as well. And yeah, thank you everyone. We do have like literally just like 2 or 3 minutes for you to like jump into the closing session link. And we see you at 4:30 just for like 20-25 more minutes of your time. We really appreciate you. Don't forget to tweet us and to hashtag at NC Engage Campus. So thank you all and have a wonderful day. I'll see you in 5 minutes.
Thank you.